Right. 22 November 2021.
Uyo uko kuno aho pano mamuona kere nai.
Right. 22 November 2021. And today I'm joined by my usual guest, Mr. Rutendo, Benson, Matinyarare. How are you, sir?
I'm good, my brother. How are you?
Fantastic. And I'm very sorry for taking your time at such a late notice. How have you been? What have you been busy with?
I've been good. I've been busy with work. I've been busy with the issue of sanctions, and we have been busy on social media fighting these battles for the minds and hearts of the Zimbabwean people, trying to debunk this negativity. And like I always say, that sanctions are not just about the economic restrictions and blockades, but more critically is the propaganda, the negative sentiment, and the delegitimization of our government that goes hand in hand with sanctions all across the world. So we've been working on trying to deal with that.
Okay, so there was some very interesting news that came out of Burundi this week. The United States of America has lifted the sanctions on Burundi. Why do you think they've lifted those sanctions?
I'm still yet to fully understand the reasons that they lifted those sanctions, so I wouldn't want to comment on something that I'm not well versed on. But I would assume either the United States has gotten what it wants out of Burundi, hence it is beginning to remove the sanctions. But I need to do more research on it before I start commenting on it.
Okay, so basically what I just wanted the audience to know is that the sanctions in Burundi were put in place in 2015 after the death of 1,200 people and the displacement of 400,000 people, after the president at that time, Nkurunziza, wanted to run for a third term. So the sanctions were put in place after that time. They've essentially now elected a new president, and that new president has been negotiating for the removal of the sanctions. And while the United States has removed the sanctions, other countries like, in fact, other sanctions are still in place, like Europe, they're still in place. And then the opposition leader, or one of the opposition leaders, has slammed the United States for removing the sanctions. So basically, I think that's the summary of what has happened. I think once you do your research, we should come back and talk in great detail about those sanctions, because I think it's very important for us to understand how sanctions can be removed from Zimbabwe.
But before you go on, Zimbabwe, I think it's very important for us to also point out that Nkurunziza died a mysterious death. Many people suspect that he could have been killed because he didn't want to toe the line on the issue of vaccines. And so the replacement of Nkurunziza with the new president, after dying under mysterious terms, and then all of a sudden the removal of sanctions is very questionable. And then I heard the description you're giving as to why the sanctions were imposed. I find it very difficult to make any conclusions based on what the West say or what newspapers say, because they're still controlled by the West. Just like many people all across the world believe that Zimbabwe's sanctions are caused by the ZANU-PF government, brutalizing its people and abusing its people and committing crimes against humanity. But what they don't understand is that there is no single investigation upon the government of Zimbabwe in the past 40 years by the Human Rights Council. They don't understand that there's been no conviction of the Zimbabwean government for human rights violation, but the United States has been convicted twice against Nicaragua and against Iran for violating human rights. And there's a current investigation for war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's very tricky to listen to people like that telling you the reasons that they impose sanctions, especially now that we know that in Zimbabwe, they were baseless sanctions, illegal, and should never have been placed in the first place.
Okay, I do understand. And let's go straight into that topic of Zimbabwe. Who is still on the sanctions list as we speak?
I think I've always said on many occasions that the sanctions list is a ruse. And I will keep insisting that the sanctions list is a ruse, because It is there to make it look like they're targeted individuals. But when you then look at the sanctions themselves, for instance, the targeted sanctions that you would talk about are the presidential executive order sanctions. So we've got 13288, we've got 13391, and we've got 13469. All of these have got individuals that are there. All of these have got names of people and farms and parastatals, banks and companies. But at the end is a disclaimer, or is at the end is actually a condition that anyone who does business with the government of Zimbabwe, companies owned by the government of Zimbabwe, companies that have more than 50% shareholding of the government of Zimbabwe, and parastatals and government institutions, those who do business with that will go under secondary sanctions and will face penalties if they clear the money of that government, its parastatals, its companies, its institutions, if they give assistance, give logistics, give software, give tools, and trade with. So what that means is that they've given us a list to take our attention away, but in reality, the real sanctions are the government of Zimbabwe and anybody who does business with them, and anybody who does business with those that do business with the companies that did business with the government of Zimbabwe. When you look at that, that is a blanket sanction that makes the list almost unnecessary, unimportant. That's why you see that they tell us that ZNDC was removed from the list. They tell us that ZB Bank was removed from the list. But you still find these companies finding it difficult to do business because they're owned in part by the government of Zimbabwe or in whole by the government of Zimbabwe, which means that the sanctions, which are called International Emergency Economic Powers Act, are upon them. But the government of Zimbabwe is not on that list. So what does it say about the list?
Okay, I'm right now looking at the list of people who were on the sanctions in the beginning. They are mostly ZANU-PF people, members of parliament, office holders. In fact, let me display this list so that people can understand what I mean. This list it reads like the ZANU-PF Central Committee list. Basically, that's what this list is. It's a list of everyone that is in ZANU-PF. Basically, that is what this list is. If you look at the original list, it had, let's go to the bottom. It had 72 people. And all of them are in ZANU-PF. So, is there a way that ZANU-PF can fight these sanctions?
Well, like I said, the list becomes a bit problematic for me to talk about. And they're not only people in ZANU-PF, there are people like Van Hoekstraten there, there was people like Bredenkamp there, and I don't think they were declared ZANU-PF members or ZANU-PF leaders. And there were a number of other business people that were on that list that are not members of ZANU-PF. So that's one of the problems. And then there's the issue I'm telling you, that anyone who does business with those people, because right now the current list has got 144 what are called special designated nationals. On those 44 designated nationals is the 55 that were added onto that. In fact, what happened is that you had that 77 initially. Some people were removed. The list was then amended in 13391. It became 88 individuals. Then when it became amended in 2008 into 18469, then it was taken up to 144 individuals. People like Bredenkamp, Rodenbach, Van Hoekstraten, and a number of other such white individuals then went to courts and began to challenge the United States to remove them and the Europeans to remove them from their lists. And they were removed from those lists subsequently. So, but at the end of the day, they do business with the government of Zimbabwe. Their companies do business with the government of Zimbabwe, which is under sanctions, and you won't find it on that list. So now my question is, what is the importance of a list that does not give you the government of Zimbabwe, its parastatals and institutions, which are also under sanctions and a blanket sanction that prohibits anybody in the United States or anyone who wants to do business in the United States to do business with this government, its institutions, its companies, and those who do business with it without a license from the United States government. Now imagine who does business with the government of Zimbabwe? All the banks in Zimbabwe, all the companies in Zimbabwe, all the companies that do infrastructure, construction, do business with the government of Zimbabwe. Now, what does it say about them if anybody that does business with the government of Zimbabwe without a license from the US president is under sanctions? It means that those companies are under sanctions at the discretion of the US government as and when they feel like it. So this is why I think these lists are unimportant, because they are tricks. They are unimportant because they try to create an illusion so that we feel that the sanctions are targeted. But I think the special rapporteur was very clear that the sanctions are not targeted because there's a lot of over-compliance, and she didn't go into detail to specify that the government itself is under sanctions to the extent that that means all Zimbabweans are under sanctions. I think the lists are not even worth talking about.
Okay, but Rutendo, I want us to troubleshoot this. If we want to remove these sanctions, we obviously have to chew a small part at a time. And you mentioned that these people on the list, they were not taken before any court. They were not asked to answer for themselves. Is that not where we need to start? To get the people on the list to challenge their presence on that list. So all the 144 people, should they not challenge their presence on that list?
Right. Now, that's a good thing that you asked. What Zimbabwe needs to do now, especially after the special rapporteur has given a ruling on what it is that these sanctions are doing, the fact that they are illegal, the fact that they are violating human rights, and the fact that there was no due process or there was no rule of law in order to determine who was going to be put on the sanctions. So that means that they're extrajudicial. They are punishment without trial. Everybody that's under those sanctions must take action. But the problem is, who is everybody? Everybody shouldn't be only the people on the list. It should be the civilians that are suffering under these sanctions, because part and parcel of why the UN Human Rights Council began to talk about the illegality of sanctions is the fact that they deprive normal people of their human rights. So those people on the list, together with the civilians, need to create what is called a class action. Now, we need to have a general class action for all Zimbabweans against these sanctions. And the action must be targeted at the countries that impose the sanctions, but also the companies that have been imposing or enforcing the sanctions. That's the very first action we need to take. Our companies then need to come together as well, because they are suffering under these sanctions, even though they are not on the list. They are unable to trade, they're unable to clear funds, they're unable to buy machinery, they're unable to retool, and the economy has shrunk, so they're unable to make the money that they're supposed to. So you look at a company like Econet, when you compare it with the value of the South African company like Vodacom or MTN on a consumer parity basis or what we call subscriber basis, you see that Econet is actually 2 to 4 times less than value it should have been if the Zimbabwean economy was firing on all cylinders. So it might not be on the list, but it's being affected by these sanctions. So the sanctions are on it as well, and other companies like that. So those companies must now come together and create their own class action. Then the ones that are listed specifically can also come together and create their own class action. And then our government must come together with SADC and other SADC countries if they can agree, and then go and take a class action to deal with the problems that have been created by these sanctions, and to also compensate the countries that have suffered when Zimbabweans have been displaced into their countries by the sanctions. So I believe that's where we should start. It must be a collective effort. But before I give over to you again, we must also encourage companies outside Zimbabwe, in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, that have failed to come into Zimbabwe, that have failed to do business in Zimbabwe, that have failed to take part in mining in Zimbabwe, and that have been prohibited from trading in Zimbabwe. They must start suing the European, American, and UK governments for having imposed sanctions and forced them to comply with illegal sanctions in the first place. Because if we Zimbabweans sue these companies that have been denying Zimbabweans accounts, denying Zimbabweans payment systems, denying Zimbabweans to be members of their institutions because of sanctions, those Zimbabweans, if they sue those companies must go and sue the United States. So we must encourage this kind of holistic attack on these countries that impose sanctions, because this is what the UN Human Rights Council's resolutions 2721 and 3413 are encouraging people to do, to hold these countries that impose these illegal sanctions accountable.
Okay, so let's go individual now. The American embassy in Harare has mentioned, the ambassador has mentioned Kudak Tagure in the last interview that they had with Trevor Ncube, he specifically mentioned him as one of the people who are on that list because he's corrupt. Well, he has not been brought before a court, like you said. Why is he not challenging his presence on that list? He's got money. He's someone with money.
I can't purport to speak. I can't purport to speak on behalf of Kudata Gule, but I know he's not ignorant because one of the institutions that he sits upon as a shareholder has actually taken the United States to a court internationally. They used a law firm, one of the biggest law firms in the world, and they actually were able to succeed in stopping the government of the United States from penalizing them $380 million. So the entire penalty was scrapped. And the problem that we have in Zimbabwe is that we've got this individualism, this selfishness. This particular bank went into court, won its case, and then accepted the sealing of the information of that particular court hearing. So instead of allowing the information of how that court case went to become part and parcel of Zimbabwe's institutional memory and part and parcel of Zimbabwe's case law, so that other companies and organizations can go and pursue the same, they've decided to seal this information. What that does is it gives the United States an advantage. And it disadvantages the Zimbabweans from which this bank comes from, that now has knowledge on how it is to fight these sanctions, is to sue in line with these sanctions. They have sealed that off, keeping the Americans safe, insulating the Americans, instead of giving this intellectual property out. However, there is always a tactic for everybody, the class action suits that are going to be done by business, to approach the legal firm that did this case, and then to use that legal firm with its institutional memory to undertake their cases using some of the tactics that they use for the bank in Zimbabwe. So Kuda knows what to do, but he's not doing it for his own reasons. And I am still to find out what his reasons are. So I won't speak on his behalf. However, he's not the only one who has done nothing. Most Zimbabwean business people, even Xavier Kasukwere is still on that list, Jonathan Moyo is still on that list, and some other business people in the country that have lots of money. And I wonder why it is that they haven't taken legal action, because they should have taken legal action, because they are being punished without trial. Not only that, how can somebody say you are corrupt without providing evidence, and without trying that evidence, and without cross-examining and giving a person an opportunity to defend themselves? And the special rapporteur said something very interesting, that because of the restrictions of sanctions, which are already illegal, people are forced to look for ways to do business, for their businesses to survive and for them to be able to give themselves livelihood. That process of breaking the sanctions and busting the sanctions automatically leads to activities that can be considered as illegal, money laundering, or other such activities that are not encouraged by monetary laws created by the very same West. And monetary laws, again, that do not comply with due process, because they don't give you a hearing, they don't give you a court case for you to defend yourself before they decide whether you're money laundering or not. That is the problem with the sanctions of Kuda, is that they make assumptions without any evidence and without trying the evidence, without due process. So that is a problem for us. So Kuda might not find any reason to go and challenge what he knows is actions that he has had to undertake in order for his businesses to stay up because of the sanctions. But I believe that the business people of Zimbabwe must come together and they must approach courts collectively and stop mazake if they want to be effective against the United States. And maybe they must even join the foreign companies that I told you about that have been denied opportunities in Zimbabwe. They should go ahead with them as well.
Okay, so let's say myself and yourself, who've been talking a lot about sanctions. Obviously, someone has to provide leadership. If you were to obtain funds, because the problem here is funding, right? Do you think the United States government will allow you to go to America and challenge, or you have to use an American company? So I'm trying to look here at the process. How would it work? Someone who is on sanctions or someone who is not desired by the Americans, how would they challenge in America, in American courts?
Yeah, the thing is, it depends whether you want to approach the American courts or you want to approach other jurisdictions. There are institutions of arbitration. There's one in Singapore. There is also the American Court of Human Rights, which is for the whole entire South American continent. So you can approach that because there are violations of human rights that have taken place there. Then you can go to the International Court of Justice, which is open for countries but not open for individuals. You can also go into America itself, like what the Kenyans did. The Kenyans went and sued the British for what happened during colonialism in British courts, and they won in British courts. In Europe, we can decide to go to the European Court or the European Court of Human Rights. Then we can approach those issues there. However, what I think is that you can also take the approach that Simba Chitando and myself are going to take here in South Africa, where we are currently earmarking the United States institutions and institutions that implemented the sanctions that we want to target through local courts. And then we might even decide to challenge them on African courts and then decide to expand that as we grow and as we get more resources to get more people believing in us. But once you've got a legal mind or a legal firm, then funds don't become an issue. And once you've got a legal firm that's willing to do this for you on what is called contingency, they'll do the job. They'll take the United States to, or institutions of the United States or the European Union and their companies to courts, sue them, and they're the experts who will know which courts to go to. I'm not a lawyer. All I can do is read what I know and understand. But at the end of the day, legal advice will tell us which courts to go specifically, which ones are the best, which ones are the easiest. And then we take those cases to those particular courts on contingency where the lawyers are covering the costs, because they know that after a big settlement, they can then get a percentage of the settlement instead of getting lawyers' fees that might be limited and less than what it is that they'll get when a settlement comes to.
Okay. So Rutendo, this is quite complicated. And I still want us to go to the people on the list. I know that you guys are doing something with Chitando. But the question that I want to ask is, how can we get the people on the list together? Is that not the biggest problem we have? Because when I look at that list, there are people there that I see that they don't deserve to be on that list. How do you get these people together? Is this not something that should be driven from government or from within the business circle in Zimbabwe, not from outside like here?
We have been trying to get a hold of some of those people. I have spoken to a number of them myself. But the problem that we have in Zimbabwe is self-centeredness and a fear of white men. There is a fear by a lot of these people who want this list to approach any institutions that are considered as white, because I don't know, a lack of confidence, a colonial mentality, but there is a lack of confidence among the Zimbabweans that are on that list who feel afraid to approach those institutions. And I keep saying to them, don't approach them on your own. Don't try to do it wega. Come together, create a team, get one legal firm that can assist you, and get lawyers from all across the world. Because if you get Zimbabwean lawyers alone, they do not understand how the institutions of the West work. They do not understand what happens within the financial institutions and systems in America. And they don't have contacts who can assist them to get information and evidence that might be required. So create a multinational team of Africans together with Europeans and even Asians that are going to come up with the social capital that will assist them to get the information and an understanding of the workings of the courts and institutions that they want to go up against. So this is what it is that our people can't do. Zimbabweans are terrible at organizing. And I wonder why we're so terrible when you consider that ZANU-PF organized one of the most successful rebellions in the world, and they succeeded. But for some reason, anyone else outside ZANU-PF after the liberation struggle don't seem to know how to organize themselves. And some of the people that are on the list, like you would know, are ex-ZANU-PF members or ZANU-PF members who went to the struggle, who should know how to organize themselves, who should know how to create a concerted effort to beat a bigger enemy than themselves. But we don't see a willingness for these people to come together and work together. And all we can do is ask, but we can't force them.
Okay, I think, Rutendo, there is a lot to be done here, and you have started very, very well. I would like to encourage you to go a step further and find these people and put them together. I don't think there's anyone in Zimbabwe who's got the capacity to start what you've started and to bring people together. So I've put your number on the screen. I hope that people who are on that list will start contacting you, because myself, I feel that after the UN has spoken, after what has happened with banks like CBZ, who were removed from the list, I'm sure Grace Mugabe has been removed, if I'm not mistaken. There is a lot of people that have been taken from that list in an arbitrary manner. There's no reason why you can put another person and then remove another person and then leave other people in there. For example, people like Chief Charumbira, I don't know why Chief Charumbira is on that list. So my belief is that if you were to put these people together, you would immediately see a result. When the United States just reads through that list, they will see that some of those names don't make sense at all. They need to be removed from there.
Well, one of the things I'll say is that sometimes the removals look arbitrary, but they're not arbitrary. The lawyers of these people, so a lawyer like the lawyers of Grace Mugabe could have approached the US Congress, they could have gone and approached the European Council, and that's how they got removed from there. They could have put in papers, they could have begun a legal process. You never know. And like I'm saying, one of the biggest problems in Zimbabwe is we are so individualistic that they don't share this information. So until you speak to Grace Mugabe and some of the people that have been removed, which is why I was saying you would see Rottenberg being removed, you see Bredenkamp being removed, and you won't know why it's happening. When we were talking with the US ambassador, the US ambassador talked about the fact that Standard Chartered paid a fine, I think of 15 or 18 million. Barclays Bank paid a fine of about 8 million. But he agreed that CBZ was also fined, but the US ambassador would not articulate that the CBZ won against the United States in a legal challenge that forced them to cancel the penalties, because these penalties are unenforceable because the sanctions themselves are illegal and they're extraterritorial, meaning it's an imposition of the domestic law of the Americans in a foreign country, which is not allowed at international law, because international law is what governs nations, not domestic laws of the other nations, because that's colonialism. So these are the things that you need to find out by conducting interviews. But most Zimbabweans don't want to talk to you. The ones that win want to win and take their wins alone. But what I don't understand is how CBZ can win its case. ZB Bank can win its case and get removed together with Intermarket and Scotfield. But they don't teach other companies in the country to do the same thing, to grow the economy so that they can have a bigger bankable and banking economy. That self-centeredness, that lack of national interest, that lack of common goal and common core values is what is the problem in Zimbabwe, because everybody's thinking of themselves. That's how we had sanctions lasting for 20 years. And if we want to end these sanctions now with the weapon that we've been given by the Special Rapporteur, we need unity, we need focus, and we need a concerted strategy that is going to help us. And like I said, we need to have unity in Zimbabwe, with unity with companies and countries outside who have suffered under the same sanctions, people who have not been allowed into the Zimbabwean economy. We need that concerted effort to actually bring enough pressure to bear on the United States for them to do something.
Okay, what is the role of the embassy in Harare? Because I think that is the place where you could start. What is their role in this whole debate?
The embassy in Harare is hostile. It is hostile because it's a superpower in a small little country that they need to feel insignificant. So they never will cooperate with the government of Zimbabwe. They will never speak the right things. Even though Congress itself might be negotiating, like I said, Congress is undertaking an impact assessment that was, I was instrumental in making that happen. They went, they approached Pollard, they negotiated with Pollard, while the US Embassy in Harare was continuing to make negative rhetoric. The reason they are doing an impact assessment on human rights and health in Zimbabwe is they are intending to remove the sanctions. But the US Embassy is not saying that. So the US Embassy is not a good player to negotiate with. It's better for us to lobby Congress. It's better for us to lobby members of Congress. It's better for us to be on the ground lobbying the American people, lobbying their constituency, and educating them on the fact that the United States is breaking international law, educating their companies, educating the government that you're going to have costs that are going to hit your pocket because your country is undertaking illegal sanctions and crimes against humanity that are going to cost the fiscus or the taxpayers of America. That's the pressure we should be putting on them, rather than talking to the embassy. And quite frankly, I think that the ambassador of the United States, with the way he answered questions on sanctions, is incompetent, doesn't understand the sanctions, and therefore he's a non-starter, according to me.
Okay, thank you very much, Rutendo, for joining me today. Is there anything else you want to say before we close?
No, I'm good. And maybe I'll end by saying, before, when I started this fight, it was a fight where most people knew me as the face of sanctions. But right now, we've now got advocates and people like Rutendo in the background, part and parcel of the institution. Those people should give confidence to those who doubted a person like myself and believe that maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think with where we've brought this fight, by depoliticizing it, taking it to the multilateral arena, being proved right for saying that the sanctions were illegal and crimes against humanity, I think now people should have confidence in us to know that we know what we're talking about, and we probably know what we're talking about more than the lawyers, the best lawyers in Zimbabwe, who allowed this crime against humanity to happen for the past 20 years. I mean, the fact that Wanabiti, the whole MDC team is full of lawyers who were perpetuating a crime against humanity, breaking international law, fomenting what we call crimes against humanity. They are actually criminals. And to think that they are criminals while they were lawyers illustrates the incompetence that is there within the legal minds that are in Zimbabwe. But I think we have proved that even though we're not lawyers, we know what we're doing. And then people like Advocate Rutendo have the technicalities and the knowledge to take this forward. You look at someone like Advocate Rutendo, he's one of the only few Black maritime lawyers in Africa. That should tell us something. He's a competent gentleman. He knows how to do this. And we are going to continue to get better at this game as we take it forward.
Thank you very much, Rutendo. And I hope that we'll be back again next week. Please let us do a thorough investigation on the situation in Burundi. And I think it will do justice if we were to give people an understanding of why they remove those sanctions.
I will definitely come with some research. Although I decided not to talk today because it's going to sound like conspiracy theories, and I know my people, when they don't know something, when they hear some evil about their masters, the Americans that they look up to, they think it's a conspiracy theory. That's why I decided not to comment. But what I will do is I'll get more information that's more palatable for our people for next week.
Thank you very much, Rutendo, and good night to everybody.
Good night.
Uyo uko kuno abo pano mamuona kere nai anovura meso anovura nzeve anogaya marigi
Kambakwe uyo anotara mari anogaya mari garai mamunzwa pane nyaya pano zvamunoda kunzwa zvinotaurwa pano madiko kumunzwa mugovane.com. Kambakwe vanogaya mari vanotara mari vanosiya mari Kambakwe vanotara feya kuti pamberi zvichafamba sei vanhu muterere zvikubatsirei mukufamba kwenyu zvikubatsirei mirai ndikudze kuti chokwadi pano chizere Kambakwe vanogaya cash vanopa mafacts vanotara straight vane evidence vane confidence plus intelligence
entertainment current affairs and news Kambakwe.com usasarire Kambakwe anogaya